Welcome to our first debate of term. The Chamber is at capacity, which is wonderful. I hope loads of you are new members who have just joined the Society or think about joining. A reminder that our open period goes on to the 14th of October. Members discount by £40 there, and anyone can come to any of our events. So bring your friends, come along, it's wonderful. Our first debate of term is on the motion, this House has no confidence in His Majesty's government. This is a historic debate. We run it every single year, and it allows us to get a great record of how Cambridge feels about the government. For the first time in 70 years, we're debating the record of His Majesty's government, which I think is very exciting. After 12 years of the Conservatives and 4 Prime Ministers, Christ is the word on everyone's lips. It should be a very exciting debate. Today, PM Truss celebrates her 30th day in office, so I look forward to hearing that record defended, as well as the last 12 years, as we come to decide, in Liz, do we trust? As we've got some new faces, I thought I'd just run through how debating works at the Union. We loosely follow a British parliamentary debating style. That means that we have 3 speakers on op and 3 speakers on prop. We alternate between prop and op, so we go prop, op, and then a round of floor speeches. And here's where I want to see you guys get involved. After every pair of speeches, anyone from this chamber can stand up and give a 1 to 2 minute short speech on their views on the motion. Try and convince us why we should vote aye or no or abstain. I'd really love to see a lot of hands up. It makes the debate so much more engaging. If you've got a strongly held view, but you want to give a whole floor speech, you can also give a POI. And here you just stand up and say, on that point or point of information, and if the speaker chooses to accept, you can highlight whatever flaw you found in their speech. It's a great way to get involved. I've urged all our speakers to take lots of points of information, so I'm hoping we'll have a buzzing chamber. It'll be very lively this evening. With that being said, I think we will get to the actual debate. And I'd like to welcome to the floor, speaking first for the proposition, Mayor Nik Johnson. Nik is the Mayor of Cambridge and Peterborough, and he leads the combined authority with responsibility for skills and further education, transport and infrastructure, housing and communities, and business support. Nik, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This House has no confidence in His Majesty's government. Lara said it herself. For the first time in 70 years, His Majesty's government. I'm feeling pretty confident about the vote here. A monarch who had seen 15 prime ministers within 2 days of meeting the leader of this one was no longer with us. I don't think she had much confidence. Government matters. Local government matters. I'm the mayor, combined authority. You've got to have confidence in your government. You've got to have trust in a government. And what we've seen recently is a deterioration in that sort of belief for the people who represent you, the people who you vote for. I'm going to question, first of all, the actual legitimacy of the leader of the current government. I am actually, however, mindful that this has happened before, where somebody has come into power to lead our country, to lead our government, without a sort of election from the country. There was Theresa May's coronation. To be fair, a Labour and cooperative mayor will acknowledge Gordon Brown slipped into the sofa slippers of Tony Blair from the grantor arrangement. So I know this happens before. But I don't truly believe that our current Prime Minister and her government has that democratic mandate that she should. The point is that the current makeup of the 190 or so thousand members of the Conservative Party do not represent me, and I do not believe they represent many of you, and they certainly don't represent the country in a demographic which is, to be fair, I am of that, male, pale and stale. Not particularly ethnically diverse in terms of membership, but I will acknowledge there is an acknowledgement of their front benches shown changes over the last few years. So, we move on. I think this could be an open goal. You've got to break it down. I have confidence, not in this government, just not this one. We have to think about who are we going to trust, who are we going to trust, or who are we going to be trusted by? I'm very proud to represent this area. And I wonder sometimes why, as a Labour and cooperative mayor, I had the benefit of winning so many votes. And I believe that was a year ago. And I think it's because there was something that was presented in a different way. And this is actually happening, where you as students and residents of this wonderful city and area are beginning to see a change in what people want out of government. And unfortunately, I don't think it's the government we have in national power at the moment. I'm going to throw out to you a date seared in my mind, an important date for this country, 1979. I was 10 years old. And that's when, to the credit of an enlightened Conservative Party, the first female Prime Minister of the country was elected. But it changed our society. It changed our communities. It was actually, and this is hard to believe for me, 1979 was only 34 years post the end of the World War II. We are now, flip it round, 43 years post Mrs. Thatcher. Mrs. Thatcher changed things. And in it, she put into motion a set of priorities, a set of thinking, which actually has delivered what we have now as the government of today. I give you the example that in 1945, the total opposite was available. A country which had been decimated by the tyranny of fascism and led by Winston Churchill, a famous leader. But one famous thing that Winston Churchill never did was at the end of the war, he didn't care. Or that's what the population thought. They wanted to be looked after. They wanted something I talk about all the time, compassion. Compassion is a very powerful tool, and we do not see it currently in this government. I've talked about, in the local area, about how we deliver better politics. You start with compassion, the 3 C's. You start with compassion. Now, here's the thing, it changes. You get cooperation, because if you see people who are compassionate, who want to represent you, who want to deliver better schools, better hospitals, better prisons. Nobody thinks about prisoners. You have to be able to show compassion to all, from the rich to the very poorest. It's the 3 C's, compassion, cooperation, and community. We are a society crying out to be looked after. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be cared for. We are a society that has come through a crisis based on COVID, a pandemic. And what was the thing that kept this country going? There were some clever scientists. But you know what? The thing that really made it was the compassion that we showed to all and each and every one of us, bringing together cooperation and then delivering for the community. That is what we want from a society, and that, unfortunately, is not being shown by the current ideas of policy being given out by His Majesty's government. Margaret Thatcher once said there was no such thing as society. That was the death knell. 1979 came along, and we, for 43 years, have been living in a... I don't have to take that, do I?
Don't have to, no.
I will come to it in a moment. I will come to it very soon. I actually do believe, in the same way, and I'll turn it the other way round. In 1979, a time I do remember growing up in the northeast, a lot of people said that ambition of the Attlee government that would look after you, that would create a national health service, that would create an education system that we would all be proud of. After 1945 to 1979, there was a sense that it was somehow failing. And people will point out bloated state organisations, too much power in the hands of the union. And things changed. I remember the winter of discontent, And that was the end of what was seen as a really strong policy development that delivered for our country. Unfortunately, now, 1979, it's taken 43 years, not 34. 43 years, we are now in the death throes of an experiment of free market, uncaring, uncompassionate government. Now, that is my main argument. I believe it is broken. I believe you, the communities, are beginning to act against it. You're beginning to recognise it. And I do strongly believe there will be a change. It's starting here in Cambridgeshire as well. So if you remember anything from my speech and why I feel so passionately that this House no longer has confidence in His Majesty's government, remember, His Majesty's government currently now shows no evidence of 3 C's, no compassion, no willingness to cooperate, and they are not delivering for the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, for opening not just the debate, but our whole term. I really appreciate it. And thank you for taking points from the audience. That's very helpful. Order! Sorry. Moving over to side opposition, I'd like to welcome Keir Bradwell. Keir is an MPhil student in political thought and intellectual history of Queen's College. Far more importantly, he's my predecessor as president of the Cambridge Union. Keir, you have the floor.
Wish me luck. Madam President, I am delighted to see that on the first event of your term there are so many new faces here and up in the rafters. And I think it is an extraordinary privilege to be doing this no confidence debate. And I've thought, because there are vaguely, hopefully, lots of new people here, that I might start with the story about why this debate matters as much as it does. In 1975, the President had arranged this debate to be televised on BBC Two. Representing Harold Wilson's then Labour government was to be the Chancellor, Dennis Healey, and on our side was Geoffrey Howe. Harold Macmillan was in the audience. And then in May week, while all of this was being planned, the building burned down. The President at the time spent all summer rebuilding this place, often by himself. Those of you who are sitting up there will notice you're sat on incredibly uncomfortable Methodist pews. Those are from a church, and he put them in himself. But by Michaelmas, the roof had been fixed, the pews were in place, and Rob Butler came along for the journey too, which is to say that the biggest and the brightest Tory grandees couldn't be prevented from doing this debate by a burning building. So what the hell has happened this year? Things do not seem to be going very well. In fact, if I was to guess, I reckon most of you here suspect that Liz Truss is doing a rather poor job as Prime Minister. And if you do think that, you probably think that because of her growth plan, which I suspect many of you think is a tax giveaway to the very best off at a time when public services are crumbling, the economy might be in recession, the pound is plummeting, and the government has just had to spend loads of money on bailing out our energy bills this winter. Yes, good. I'm delighted that this audience seems roughly on the same page, because what I'm now going to do in the rest of my speech is argue that you are all completely and utterly wrong. You're wrong about what the growth plan says, and I hope I can convince you that you're wrong not only about that, but about what it, more widely, and what Liz Truss's government wants to be in the long term too. I'm quite early. I've not even started defending. Go on. Absolutely. If we weren't here to defend the one major policy package of Liz Truss's government, what would we be doing? We'd just be hearing from Nick about how good Clement Attlee was, or whatever else that there is to do. I think it's absolutely right that we talk about what Liz Truss is up to. Now, the growth plan has 3 things, so far as I can tell. It has tax cuts, it has energy support, and it has structural reforms, and I want to take them one by one. The common myth about the tax cuts is that it is a £45 billion bung for high earners. Adam Tooze, the widely respected economist, called it that. And the Resolution Foundation, if any of you are on Twitter will have seen, they did a graph that showed the sort of income distribution of the tax and spend measures in this plan. And it looked like it was brilliant for the high earners and terrible for everyone else. But unfortunately, this is entirely wrong. The one tax measure that was aimed at higher earners cost £2 billion of that £43 billion. And in fact, it is less than that, because ultimately the plan there was to reduce pinch points, distortionary incentives in the tax structure that would make the tax far more complicated than it needs to be. So actually, it was paid for by increasing taxes on those earning £100,000 by freezing the 40% threshold. But this means, in effect, that all of the tax stuff that has caused so much blowback, so much drama, caused U-turns and chaos, was effectively a redistribution from those earning £100,000. Now, for the Islington Mafia who run the Labour Party, I understand why taxing those earning £100,000 seems dangerous and alarming. What will Keir Starmer do with slightly less income? But for the rest of us, what's going on? It doesn't seem to me like this really was worth all of the hassle that we gave it. And in fact, Nik, I will maybe come to you later. Nik said that we weren't interested in what people wanted and that there was some sort of democratic mandate legitimacy problem that Liz Truss has. But the unfortunate fact that Labour needs to confront is that the public agree with us on taxes. Just a month ago, 51% said that taxes should fall overall, and only 8% wanted Rishi Sunak or Labour's shared vision of a high tax economy. The public support reversing national insurance. They support reversing the corporation tax rise, as well they should in a recession, and they support making it easier for people to get on the housing ladder by lowering stamp duty. So I would argue that Liz Truss is more in touch with what people want than almost anyone else. Yes, go on.
How are you saying that Liz Truss is helping people get on the housing ladder when she appoints some of the Tory party's most notorious NIMBYs into her own government?
Oh, I don't agree. I don't agree at all. In fact, as I was about to come on to later in the structural reforms plan, an absolutely integral pillar of the growth plan is to make it easier for people to build homes. Simon Clarke is one of the great YIMBYs around. He's a great man. There are countless people in this government who understand the importance of the housing issue and are committed to building them. Yes, go on.
There are other people in the government who are not called Simon Clarke.
That may be true. I would even agree with you, but I would argue that on housing, this government is as sound can be. Go on.
What about the fact that mortgage rates have doubled in 2 weeks? Well, is that
I fear the audience is not entirely with me tonight, and that is unfortunate. We'll power through. I will agree there were some rather unfortunate market movements recently. But isn't it interesting, would you not ask, that as the pound recovers back to $1.12, in fact, has risen from what it was before Kwasi's wonderful announcement, no one seems to have changed their mind. No one has now said, now clearly people do have faith in the British currency, I better change my view. No, they haven't said that. They saw the reaction and they committed to a view. Now, tax cuts, I fear, is maybe dangerous territory, so I'll move on. I want to talk about the energy price guarantee, which in some ways seems to me as if it should be obviously the main event of this evening. This is unprecedented government action. It's larger than the support package we rolled out to protect people during coronavirus, a thing that, as Nik so rightly put, was a sense of community under a Conservative government. I'm very grateful to you for being the one to make that point for me. It will save the average household £1,000 on their bills this winter. That is more money than any other government in Europe is offering. If you still believe that the Conservatives stand for tight purse strings and a refusal to intervene in markets, then this really should be the moment that you wake up and think again. Indeed, contrary to another widespread myth, this is being funded partly at the expense of those who are going to profit out of this crisis. There is a windfall tax. We just don't talk about it for some reason. It's called the Energy Profits Levy, and it will raise billions. It will raise enough that it could have paid for the tax changes that have been so unpopular. It could have paid for the reductions in stamp duty, and it could have paid for the annual investment allowance that would have encouraged businesses to keep investing as we enter into a recession. And it could have done those things combined. It's a point somewhere vaguely. Yes? I'm coming to you. I'm absolutely coming to you. The very next line in my speech says, I'm now going to talk about public services. So, I will now talk about public services. For the last many, many decades, British politics has been in a bind because for so many reasons, we can't increase the supply of goods or services, we can't grow, and because we can't grow, we can't fix the public services that are so desperately in need of more money. To give an example, say we reversed all of the tax cuts that we've just put forward. We didn't do any of it. We didn't try to prevent the hike in corporation tax during a recession. We did none of that, and we funneled it all into the NHS. We would fund it for a few more days, but we would make nowhere near the dent required to seriously start improving our health service. The old model of tax and spend, of just pump a bit more money in and hope that that improves things, clearly doesn't work. Because for the last 12 years of Conservative government, we've spent more per head per year on the NHS every year. The NHS is better funded now than it was at any time under Labour. So clearly, there is something else going on. There is something else that is wrong. It is true. It is true. And this is only one of a whole range of examples. The fact that our energy bills are so high this winter, and the fact that the bailout was so market-shakingly expensive, owes a good deal to our housing stock being the worst insulated in Europe. No, I've just been told to have a minute, and look, I've got 4 pages. This is going to be tough. Our houses get so cold, they are a health risk. We don't have better homes to offer like the rest of Europe does because we make it illegal to build them. And as this very excellent floor intervention points out, we have some wonderful people in government who are prepared to do something about it. Take Britain's energy supply. There is a now famous video on YouTube of Nick Clegg in about 2010 saying that we don't need to build any more nuclear power because it would only start to benefit us by 2022. That is the Lib Dems' legacy. Britain has built no new nuclear power stations in 30 years. And indeed, even now, in times of crisis, staggering near-termism abounds. A major part of Sunak's leadership bid, not that I want to go there, involved keeping onshore wind illegal. And the Conservative MP Brendan Clark-Smith tweeted a jubilant video of having vetoed part of a £400 million solar power project. No thanks, I have to go on. There is NIMBYism, there is resistance to increasing supply everywhere you look. And indeed, if we continue at this rate and we don't do something about it, some recent economists have estimated we will end up as poor as Poland in just 12 years' time. Nobody, for whatever reason, has dared tackle these problems until now and until Liz Truss. And it is this that I think means you should have confidence in our government. What is Liz Truss going to do? In the growth plan, they talk about investment zones, which are streamlined planning applications. They talk about reducing the cost of childcare, legalising onshore wind, legalising housing in more parts of the country, reducing some of the most paternalistic and condescending anti-obesity messaging, and simplifying tax codes for contractors, thank you. And so on and so forth. And this, I think, is the crux of it. If you join the massive pile-on that clearly is going on here, then you're going to make these measures more difficult to get through. Yes, Truss has made some mistakes. She deserves to be criticised for not preparing the ground better for her announcement, and clearly, in hindsight, communications could have been fractionally tweaked here and there. But it is a huge mistake to focus on that at the expense of the much greater prize on offer. This is the government that will finally put the supply side of the economy first. The government that will do the difficult and evidently unpopular work to free up our policy choices for the next few decades. And the alternative is what? The alternative is Labour, who still think the problems can be solved via other means without realising that their entire worldview is the one that has been falsified since the financial crisis. In this respect, Labour are much closer to the old Conservative governments than this one is. Much of the backbench outrage we have seen over the past few however many days is a reflection of that fact. And yes, parts of this are risky, parts of this are gamble. The markets are clearly nervous. But a very wise friend of mine said that this was a gamble in the same sense that quitting a job that hasn't given you a pay rise in 10 years is a gamble. The idea that something will come along eventually without us doing anything different seems at least as foolhardy as trying to change course. So I therefore urge the House to do this. Give us a chance. The PM has barely got her feet under the table. She's had 30 days, and she has inherited the job during an exceptionally difficult time. Of course, there are going to be failures and mistakes. But at the same time, that crisis is the crisis that shows why she is the right person to take this job on.
I cannot let him take it. He's
thank you.
12 minutes.
I am over. I'm going to finish. The growth plan is ambitious and it may fail, but it was intended to be the major achievement of Truss's time, and the intention to deliver is surely there. To call off the experiment now, to pass power over to Labour, would trap us into another decade of stretched services, rising house prices and stagnant growth. I urge this House to ignore the cries of the Twitter commentariat and the eloquent pleas of the other side tonight. I urge this House to be brave, and I urge this House to place its confidence in our government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keir, for a very brave speech and even braver taking of interventions. I appreciate it. We move now to you, the members, or soon-to-be members in some of your cases, for a round of floor speeches. So please put your hand up if you've got a short 1 to 2 minute speech in favour of the motion. You're a very quick hand, so I'll go there. We'll just get a mic to you quickly. Please can you say your name and college for the record as well before you speak?
Inherited from our parents, and what a good job she has done of that. Never has a left-wing radical had so much success in a short period of time. The Bank of England is collapsing, the Queen is dead, and I'm sure her father would be very proud of the trashing of the Tory party she has done. The other observation I have had, and I say this in the nicest possible way to the opposition member, is who on earth has been in power for the last 12 years? I mean, I'm sort of wondering which party this might be. You know, which is the party which has churned through 4 prime ministers and has had more political instability than Italy on steroids? Which party is that? And we have these ludicrous ideas that somehow rehashing the ghost of Thatcher and bringing back some weird nostalgic vision of the 80s, missing out all the hard bits, is going to fix everything. How insulting is it to people on low pay when they get told that, in fact, the people who are really suffering in the society are the bankers? They're people earning 150,000. And we heard all of this nonsense about we're taxing people more than 40%. That is not true. He'll be aware all income brackets have been frozen. So that burden is being foisted on working people. It is not being foisted on the super rich. And to try and do such a pathetic swapsy, I think, is below the dignity of the Speaker. Madam Chair, I think, let's just face it, we have had a terrible series of events under this government. We have had, first of all, a Prime Minister who does not respect his people in the form of Boris Johnson. It should not be forgotten that this was the government that acted glacially on COVID, putting thousands of lives at risk. It should not be forgotten that they spat in the face of those sacrifices. And it should absolutely not be forgotten that the rudderless Conservative Party, after the sort of albatross of Boris had sapped all the life from it, decided to turn to what it knows best, and that is flagrant elitism. The only option at this point is to get rid of the lot of them. There is no other option, and no shuffling the deck. I know that Boris and Liz Truss like to model themselves off of Churchill, and yes, in this sense, it is perhaps true never was so much owed to so few, but in this case, it is owed to the bankers and owed to the few at the top of the system. It doesn't matter whether it's Mordaunt, whether it's Rishi, whether it's Suella Braverman, whether it's Kemi Badenoch. The whole bloody lot of them have to be removed. And removed from power, and a new government must come in. And that is the only way to restore the confidence of this broken nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for setting the bar so tremendously high for our first floor speech of term. That was brilliant. I'll move now to any speeches in abstention. Got a few hands. Just there, and we'll go to the other side.
I'd like to say that I have a great deal of sympathy for Keir and what he's tried to do. I do believe we need supply-side reform to get economic growth going in this country. And I do believe, as he does, that the Labour Party is not the party to do this. But neither is the Conservative Party, I must sadly say. He's talked about... Let's have a look at the Conservative Party. Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, described her ultimate aspiration to get immigration in the UK down to the tens of thousands. She is part of the anti-growth coalition. When Brendan Clark-Smith, a junior minister, celebrates preventing the establishment of solar farms in his constituency, he is part of the anti-growth coalition. When Grant Shapps, then the Secretary of State, blocks the redevelopment of housing in an area around the Cockfosters underground station in one of the most expensive cities in the world, he is part of the anti-growth coalition. And locally, when the South Cambridgeshire Liberal Democrats put forward a local plan to build 49,000 much-needed homes, Anthony Brown, the Conservative MP for South Cambridgeshire, called the plan a nightmare and said that the Liberal Democrats had declared war on our way of life. It seems that the greatest threats to Truss's supply-side reforms are within her own party. But at conference, instead of attacking distance within her party, as Thatcher did in the 80s, Truss is too weak to name her real parliamentary rivals, which shows she has no chance of defeating them.
Thank you so much. And finally, for someone to defend the government, I'm looking for an op speaker. I see a hand right in the back row. We'll just get a mic to you. And a reminder, name and college for the record.
So I'd like to preface this with the fact, Conrad Wolfson, I always forget that. I actually voted for Nick. I'm not a Tory. But I come from this in that the tin pot lady, the Lib Dem sleeper agent, is the perfect argument in favour of accelerationism that we have ever seen. Indeed, look at the statistics here. The Tories are collapsing at rates hitherto unforeseen. You know, it's almost impossible quite how far they've collapsed in quite how short a time. And so, if it continues on this trend, and we just let her do her thing, it could be the death of the Tory party forever. Frankly, I think we just let it roll. At this point, the country's been buggered for a little while anyway, and I think it's going to take a while to get out of the miasma either way. So we might as well just embrace it and see how far we can drive them down. They're bringing about their own downfall. You know, what was it Sun Tzu said? Don't interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. Sorry? Oh, right. It's Napoleon, thank you. This is the benefits of a Cambridge audience. But indeed, look, I'm not in favour of her. I think she's an absolute basket case. And I think anybody that thought she was good for the position, frankly, is also a basket case. But it's for that exact reason that they should remain in power, to drive down the polling figures even further, and so that they can be completely electorally wiped out in 2 years' time. God knows why they want to keep her in charge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Conrad, for quite a creative approach to opposing the motion. I am going to give the government one more chance to defend themselves. To any more speeches in opposition? The back there in the blue tie. Name and college for the record, and we'll just get a mic to you.
Owen Cooper, Selwyn College. So, in these dark times, it's all too difficult to attack the government, to attack Liz Truss. We've just come out of a pandemic. Russia has invaded Ukraine, causing gas prices to soar, and we're living through a cost of living crisis. However, the Conservative Party is actually working hard to build back better and make Britain greater, wealthier, and safer. I'm a proud Conservative Party member who voted for Liz Truss in the Tory leadership race. Liz Truss is an open-minded, charismatic leader who is willing to admit when she makes a mistake. She's willing to U-turn, or as I call it, rethink. And the recent rethink on the 45p top tax rate proves that further. Liz Truss is a humble pragmatist, willing to do the right thing in the end. The Conservative Party has always approached an innovative and strong free market capitalist economy, and Liz Truss has a bold plan to grow the economy. She will speed up housing infrastructure projects, deliver more housing, create investment zones to attract investments to local economies, limit the strike disruption that is damaging our economy and disrupting our public services. And she will cut your taxes to put more money in your pockets. The Conservative Party has a proud 187 years of history. Winston Churchill defeated the Nazis. Margaret Thatcher won the Falklands War. And Boris Johnson got Brexit done and steered us through a global pandemic. I have every confidence that Liz Truss will steer us through a cost of living crisis. Furthermore, no confidence implies that there's a better alternative. Is there? Well, inconsistent approach from Labour between the moderates and the militants with regards to the trade unions that are causing havoc. And the Liberal Democrats, well, to be quite frank, I'm not even sure who's leading the Liberal Democrats. So, in conclusion, His Majesty's government is working hard to cut your taxes, defend your country, support Ukraine, and to make our nation great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a great round of floor speeches. There will be another chance. There will be another chance to have your voice heard in the second round of floor speeches, particularly you guys up in the rafters who I've been neglecting, so I'm very sorry about that. But we now move to our second round of paper speakers, and I'm very proud to announce Councillor Elise Meschini. Elise is chair of Greater Cambridge Partnership, delivering up to £1 billion to great infrastructure and over 44,000 new jobs in Cambridge. She's also the deputy leader of Cambridgeshire County Council. Elise, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Madam President, members, guests. It's a massive honour to be here. This is the first dispatch box anyone's ever given me. Sorry, what do I have to do? Sorry, apologies. We'll start again. This indeed remains the first dispatch box anyone's ever given me. And if it is to be the last, I will remember this for a while, and so will my parents. So thank you. In researching this motion, I have to say, I hope the House will forgive me for saying that at one point I just felt like coming here and just, saving you 10 minutes of having to listen to me and just go like this. But, maybe it's the Italian in me. And no, I am not on steroids, wherever you are. We do sort of tend to put a bit too much emphasis on hand gestures. So for the benefit of the House, let me rest my case on three main arguments. To deserve the confidence of this House, the government needs two. Number one, have control of its own backbench MPs. Number two, show that it is in control of the economy by having the confidence of the markets. And number three, measure up to the promises it makes by the outcomes it begets. And before I get into these points in more detail, I would like to reassure the House that while party political points may infiltrate my arguments in subtle ways, I intend to structure my intervention based on the principle that any administration, government or otherwise, should be judged by the parameters it sets itself. Smart administrations make this easy to do. They set targets that they already know they can achieve. They prepare the supporting evidence in advance of wheeling out policy so that if the element of surprise is to be exploited, for example, in terms of the news cycle, this does not come at the expense of credibility or indeed sanity. Not so smart administrations also make this easy to do by doing absolutely none of that, and we shall see which one this is. We come to the first point I was going to make, which is backbench MPs. Now, I'm no parliamentarian, as you know, but I do lead a Labour group. I have a chief whip. He happens to be here. I was actually not expecting him to be here, but there he is. And so I kind of understand the business of whipping, like you sort of think, common sense. The PM and the Chancellor, they develop the policy, then they send their whips out, they scurry off in all directions, and they look for assurance that the number of possible rebels in the parliamentary party is not greater than half. This is where the maths get complicated. No greater than half the current parliamentary majority. If that reassurance is obtained, all well and good, and you can go public with your policy. If that reassurance is not obtained, then you sort of have to go back to square one, rinse, repeat, for as many times as it takes. Now, we have the honor of having Mr. Affolami here, who I look forward to hearing if he will explain what exactly happened this time and why the sequence of events actually seems to have gone completely backwards. So this led to a number of embarrassing events during party conference, no less, where the PM pre-recorded interviews where by the time they were aired, the categorical assurances given had been completely contradicted, twice in 48 hours. a U-turn on the 45p rate of income tax, and another one on the timing of the financial bill and the OBR report. Why do these matter? Why do these matter? Because a third one is underway. Once again, not just backbench MPs like Michael Gove and Grant Shapps, but cabinet members like Penny Mordaunt have already spoken publicly about their disagreement with the PM and the Chancellor about the operating on non-pension benefits in line not with wages but with inflation. Yes, please?
Surely disagreement with backbench MPs and other colleagues will make more thoughts and make wise policy. Would you not agree with that?
Maybe, or maybe... maybe it makes you look like a bit of a nutter. I don't know. I'll leave it up to the House. But, you know, if my cabinet were going out against me, I would not be happy. Neil, make a note. But, you know... Anyway, the number of dissenting voices does suggest that backbench distaste for a cut in benefits is of a similar scale to that which forced the 45p U-turn, so expect another one. Grow the size of that financial hole where the funding for the promised tax cuts is supposed to be found. U-turns need not be fatal. Mrs. Thatcher had her own, absolutely. But this Prime Minister wooed her party obdurates as the most adamantine lady not for turning. And what kind of government is she going to run where a 70-seat majority is not enough to avoid backbenchers' backseat driver under the full glare of the national media? Turning to my second point, the confidence of the markets. Now, a little turbulence, says the Chancellor after the reception of his growth plan, which crashed the economy. £300 billion wiped overnight from the combined value of the national stock and bond market. Sent sterling spiralling down and gilts soaring, costing the Bank of England £65 billion to prop up pension funds. I am reminded of... yes, please?
The Bank of England's only spent about £3 billion, not 65.
That is to date. That is to date. They will spend all of that by the 14th of October, I am told, and I'll come back on the 15th and tell you. And by the way, yes, I read the Guardian Live blog today. But anyway, yes, I was going to quote John McDonnell. When he was Shadow Chancellor, business leaders and bankers told him that they didn't like his plans because too much government borrowing would send the markets crashing. When he asked how to avoid that, they told him the markets do not like surprises. So how about this for a surprise, delivered by a government that seems to command no majority on its own benches, by a verbally incontinent chancellor who needs to learn the offhand remarks he happens to make when he's forgotten he's in a weekend TV studio, send shockwaves well beyond his comprehension. We believe in fiscal responsibility. A shell-shocked PM was forced to repeat over and over in a conference speech that was basically an exercise in, please do not fuck this up any further. Sorry, I was assured I could swear, and I will not.
Allowed to swear, that's fine.
I will not if I can't, but anyway. You know, we believe in fiscal responsibility. The jury had packed their bags and left the courtroom a long time ago in pursuit of the bolted horse. To my third point, outcomes. I don't think we need to spend too much time repeating the promises that have been made. Growth, more money in an ordinary family's pockets, etc. and so forth. While the Prime Minister has ruled out changes to the triple lock on pensions, the typical family on universal credit, already around £1,500 short as a result of last October's £20 cut and April's lower than inflation operating, will now see their losses rise to £2,000. No family I know can afford to lose as much. And yes, it is very serious. And what about those with mortgages? As a result of the Chancellor's not a budget, interest rates shot up. Latest Bank of England forecast from this morning, 6%. They shot up and 1,600 mortgage products were withdrawn from the market. Mister, where are you? Does it matter what's in the growth plan? I have a mortgage. Yes, it fucking matters. Yes, please.
Surely, did monetary policies set up
It does matter. It absolutely does matter. Thank God they are independent. May I remind you whose idea it was? I'm not going to say anything. You look it up. My hero, my absolute hero. Yes? They have? Pray to God they don't do that. Anyway, you know, I have a mortgage. It does matter to me what it said in the growth plan. My pockets do not have more cash in them. And, you know, the average family with a mortgage is seeing their payments spiraling in a way that absolutely dwarfs the already daunting energy bills. But hey, bankers are getting bigger bonuses, and venture capitalists are seeing restrictions lifted in terms of planning, labor, and environmental regulations. Those things matter. Even successful venture capitalists would have to admit that they did not get rich on their own. They have to hire workers whose education we, the British people, pay for. They have to travel on roads and railways that the state maintains. By the way, local government, mostly roads, and I can tell you it's a bloody hard job. Neil knows that again. So they travel on roads that we maintain, our taxes maintain, and they depend on a public health system that our taxes finance. Venture capital relies on social capital. Markets need to be underpinned by morals. This is not me, by the way, it's Gordon Brown, once again my hero. Public investment is needed to create the conditions for growth, and any sensible growth strategy has to offer more than tax cuts and deregulation. It has to support science, innovation, infrastructure, and skills, with the right powers in the right places to create internationally competitive clusters of industry. And it has to acknowledge an old but recently forgotten truth, that when the strong help the weak, we all get stronger. So, Madam President, this is where I leave it. A government which has not the confidence of its backbenchers, not the confidence of the markets, and judging by recent polls, not the confidence of the country. I beg to move that it does not have the confidence of this House. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise, for such a poignant set of remarks, and thanks to everyone that raised the point of information. It really improves the debate. I move now back to the opposition and to Bim Afalami MP. Bim is the Conservative Member of Parliament for Hitchin and Harpenden. He's also the chair of the Parliamentary Renewable Sustainability Energy Group and leads the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Credit Unions. Bim, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you, Madam President. It is a pleasure, an honour to be here for the first debate of term, and it is so good to see so much Conservative support in the room already. But what I first wanted to do was take on some of the points that we've heard from the other side, because I think it's important to take those on before I get to the heart of my own arguments. The first point that I want to discuss was from the Honourable Lady who spoke most recently, in a very good and amusing speech, I thought, but she said somehow it was a bad idea for MPs, ministers, to voice their own views, to discuss issues in public. Is this not what we expect of our parliamentarians? Is this not what we expect of public debate? I welcome the fact that my colleagues have become a little less bidden by the party line. I think that is a good thing, and I intend to follow through with that this evening. And the second thing I wanted to say in response to the first speaker for proposition, who also made, in my view, a very impassioned speech about his good leadership in this area. And of course, I commend him on the work that he has done locally. But actually, the body of his speech, if you remember it, was all about history. And as a former historian, you know, and I studied at the other place, and I appreciate history. He talked about 1945, he talked about 1979, very important, but not now. I want to talk about the future and the here and now, and why I, and indeed this House, should have confidence in His Majesty's government. I'm not going to go on about the fact that we have the most ethnically diverse cabinet and parliamentary party in history and the third female prime minister. I probably shouldn't even go on about the fact that we have been lauded at COP26, coming up for COP27, by the International Energy Authority for having the most progressive, forward-thinking, green, clean energy policy anywhere in the industrialized world. I don't even want to go on about the fact that we have had record investment in infrastructure over the last 12 years, more than at any time in our history, and yes, that includes 1945. I don't even want to talk about the fact that our environmental protections in this country are some of the strongest and most effective anywhere. Indeed, I shouldn't even, no, I will continue, but I'll come back to you later. I shouldn't even continue to talk about the fact that levelling up, the very important idea that was significantly contributed to us winning the last general election with a record majority, the idea that everybody has talent in all parts of this country. Everybody has, you deny that, sir? Let me finish this point and I'll come back to you. That the levelling up, the idea that talent is evenly distributed in this country but opportunity is not. That fundamental idea, which was key to us winning the general election, all of these things are very important reasons, and I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Do you call record numbers of people in food banks in poverty in the seats that you won and pledged to protect? Do you call that levelling up, or is it just another empty slogan and broken promise?
Well, I commend the honourable gentleman from St John's for his point, and if you haven't already noticed, this guy's going to be a star here. He speaks incredibly well. What I would say to the honourable gentleman is this. Yes, he recognises a lot of the seats that we've won, there are problems of poverty, social deprivation and the like, and he is right to recognise that. But if Labour was the answer to those problems, why didn't Labour win those seats? And the fact that in those areas, many of which had not voted Conservative ever for at least a very long period of time, I think that he should think about what the people in those areas actually think about the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. But none of these things that I've mentioned is the core of my case. The actual core of my case as to why you should have confidence in His Majesty's government is because I agree with Keir. Now, you're thinking, and that may be a surprise because I heard his speech too, and frankly, we're making slightly different arguments, but of course, I'm not talking about my honourable friend here. I'm talking about Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party. And you're confused now. I can see quizzical faces. And I agree with him because he practically agrees with all areas of government policy. He has confidence in His Majesty's government. Let me explain how. On Brexit, he doesn't want to change anything. He says Brexit, he's not going to change policy, he's not going to change any trade deals. What else? On the COVID recovery plan that the Labour Party put out, parts of it were lifted word for word from Jake Berry, who's the new Conservative Party chairman's plan. On the NHS, he's not proposing any structural reforms. He's not proposing any more money. He doesn't seem to want to change that. On tuition fees, now I've got to tread carefully here, but on tuition fees, he isn't even promising to change anything there. Let's take industrial strategy. Boring topic, I accept, but he isn't even changing anything at all. What he's proposing to do, guess what, is the same industrial strategy as we have, but he says he wants it to be greener. Okay, that is a slight, distinct difference. Yeah. I didn't think of that. My only response to this honourable gentleman could be that if the person sitting opposite the Tory Prime Minister seems to have confidence in all our policies, this House should too. And I would just finish my litany of reasons why Keir Starmer seems to agree and have confidence in His Majesty's government, that he even agrees with the vast majority of our growth plan. So this growth plan that has come in for a lot of criticism, a lot of debate tonight and in the public, and I can agree there are aspects to it that I'm sure people here will disagree with. The Labour leader, the person whose job it is to say the government's doing a bad job, can barely come up with a reason why he opposes the growth plan. And indeed, he actually said that he agrees with the objectives of the growth plan. So I will finish, Madam President, to say this government has a good overall record, as I started by saying. This government is doing tough things at a tough time globally in the right way and going in the right direction. And I say this, by the way, as somebody who supported Rishi Sunak in the leadership contest. This is not an entirely this isn't a factional view from a part of the Conservative Party. And even if you don't believe me on those points, even if you think I'm speaking complete rubbish, if you look at the leader of the opposition on all major areas of our policy, he agrees with us too. That's why, no, I'm coming to my crescendo. That is why you should have confidence in His Majesty's government. Thank you.
Thank you, Bim, for a genuinely impeccable speech. I really enjoyed that. On that high, we'll move back to the audience. This is your last chance to give a floor speech in this debate, so do take it. I'm looking for people wanting to speak in proposition of the motion. I'm starting in the rafters. At the back there, can we get a mic over there? It's going to take a sec, but we'll do it. We've got an event manager down. Are you all right? Proposition.
A heroic effort, we can all say, from him on that front. Now, God, this is scary, isn't it? Right, this won't take very long. Most Tory governments are founded on hatred. We all know that. That's a relatively simple proposition. I mean, in all the Tory governments of my lifetime, and without giving too much away, I was born in the early 2000s, the rule has seemed to be that the friends of the Tory party do incredibly well out of it for some peculiar reason, and everybody else usually does quite badly. Now, I see no reason that this has changed in the new government that's come in. Nobody seems to. I mean, you look, I'm not a huge supporter of the Labour Party as it is, but you just have to look at the poll ratings anywhere in the country practically, and you see the results of Tory negligence and Tory failure in policy. In fact, while most Tory governments hate the people, we have a fairly unique Tory government. You have to commend them on that, because this is a Tory government that appears to hate itself, which must be a first. But while I think it is completely right that this House should declare thoroughly that we have no confidence in this government, I have also had no confidence in Boris Johnson's government. I had no confidence in Theresa May's government, and I had no confidence in David Cameron's governments either. And more broadly, I have no confidence, and we should have no confidence, in a 40-year neoliberal orthodoxy that brings us to the same places and the same positions and the same social tragedies over and over and over again. And let me bear a warning to this House. In the future, when a Tory leader, and there's a real danger, we've already heard a Tory leader speak today, comes to you and they say, we have changed, we are different now, forget the past, we will build a better Britain for you. Heed the past, don't forget it, because they will do what they have been doing for longer than I have been alive and for nearly as long as my parents have been alive. And we cannot let that happen to this country anymore. Thank you.
And now I'm looking for an abstention speaker. You were very quick hands, so in the fourth row there in the blue jacket.
Ewan Woods, Corpus Christi College. I think on both sides of the House in this issue, there has been a key element of policy which has been forgotten, and I would argue is the main focus of any government across the world, which is keeping the country. In this case, of course, I'm referring to the Union. The proposition and the opposition have failed to recognise the fact that this government and this opposition as well seem to have no strategy for keeping the Union together. On the Conservative side, Liz Truss seems to be adamant in sticking her fingers in her ears and not listening to a word Nicola Sturgeon has to say. And on the Labour side, it seems that Gordon Brown has been locked in the Labour headquarters basement to be only rolled out any moment they need to try and look like they care about the United Kingdom as a union itself. What I would like to see from both parties and from the final speaker tonight is some evidence that either side cares about the union and can make the case that if given power, or will continue to be given power, will actually keep the country together and not let the constitutional crisis that's been going on for nearly 10 years be simply kept being pushed further and further away and held together purely by the Supreme Court, not letting Nicola Sturgeon deny legal reality.
And then we will move. David, could you get me a glass of water? Please. Because I'm mic'd up, so the coughing will be quite annoying for our next speakers. Thank you. And then we'll finally move across to the opposition. You had your hand up before I even spoke, so we'll go there. Name and college.
So, my name's Sal. I'm at Homerton College. First, I'm going to say I've been told today that I was a Sigma male. So, I think, like a Sigma male, I have to go my own way. And I have to say that the two speeches we've heard from the opposition side today have been utterly convincing. So I need to speak my mind. But unlike a Sigma, my phone's been going off a lot today and in the past months. And it's not friends or family, which I wish they'd text, but it's BBC News Flash. And every time I check on it, it's Kwasi's done this thing, the pound's plummeted, and my savings are destroyed. And I have to say, it's not very encouraging, for someone with a student loan, etc. And I've recently felt like quite a lot of fear for the future, to be honest. So that's how I've been feeling until today. But just a couple of days ago, I was actually watching the interview with Liz Truss, wonderful Liz Truss, on Joe YouTube channel. And it fucked up my YouTube recommended because I was scrolling and I started to see Margaret Thatcher videos. And, well, thanks, Liz, for screwing up my recommended, but I got curious. I have to admit, I got curious. So I clicked on one of them, and actually I'd heard that quote before. It's Maggie Thatcher in front of Downing Street, and she says this memorable line: "Where there is discord, may we bring harmony." Actually, I'll do the accent. "Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope." I'm not almost done. Then it hit me like a lightning bolt. It just made sense. I knew it's going to trickle down. It's going to trickle down. I felt electrified, and I couldn't help myself. I had to jump out into the garden, and I put my hands up in the air, and I said, "To the world, trickle down!" But Liz Truss, I think, she likes Maggie Thatcher. And I think she's got her own twist on the mantra, and it goes a little bit like this: "Where there is harmony, may we bring discord. Where there is truth, may we bring error. Where there is faith, may we bring doubt. And where there is hope, may we bring despair."
Thank you, Sal. I'm wary of impressions in this chamber, but that was a good one, so thank you. I'm getting the impression there's a lot of passion from the students here. I don't want to cut you off, so we're going to do a second round of floor speeches, because we've got some time. So anyone else want to speak in proposition of the motion? Over there, third from the back.
Okay, do I say my name?
Eamon College, for the record, if possible.
Alessia, also at Homerton College. Firstly, I'd like to address what Keir said, and unlike Bim, I'm referring to the Keir in the room. Now, you said that we're too quick to judge Liz Truss, and she's only been in office for 30 days. Well, to be honest, that is an inadequate argument. Politics moves quickly, day by day, and in some cases, hour by hour. And we need a Prime Minister that is reactive and that will respond and that has a plan. And to be honest, can someone tell me what Liz Truss's plan is? Because it seems that she is just following the steps of Boris Johnson, and it also seems that her cabinet does not have a clear goal. Let's look at Suella Braverman. Now, it seems that she's just copying Priti Patel in terms of immigration, and she wants to cut the immigration flow. And in the last 24 hours, there's been reports that apparently, Liz Truss wants to increase immigration to an extent to promote economic growth. Now, if Liz Truss does not trust in her own cabinet, why on earth should we trust her? It's incredibly unclear. And to add to that, there have been recent reports which reveal that from 2012 to 2017, over 300,000 people died as a result of austerity cuts caused by the Tory government. Now, anybody that truly believes in ethical or moral politics, how on earth can you stand there and defend a party that has just announced that they want to cut even more public spending in key sectors? This simply doesn't make sense. And whilst you shake your head, it seems that perhaps you don't care about the working class people of this country. And ultimately, if you have true confidence in the Conservative Party of today, well, I guess you need to sort out your morality. Thank you.
One final floor speech and abstention? Go on.
Thank you for both sides giving their views, and I'm here speaking for abstention. My name is Polly Yan from Clare College. So I think there's quite a sort of separated spectrum in terms of what we believe, and I think people still stuck in that view, for which reason I would like to say something kind of in between to encourage some discussion and thought, especially for the final speakers on both sides. Let's bring back to this sort of embarrassment we had in this country 2 weeks ago in the mini budget. We have a reduction on taxation at a very good, difficult time, and it brings chaos. It brings chaos to the financial market. It brings chaos for everyone. And as Sal mentioned correctly, it keeps his BBC blinking all the time, and it's very discomfort for all of us. So that triggers my fury. Well, I thank Owen Cooper for being deliberately, openly conservative, and so must I. But unfortunately, I can't stand for opposition today because it triggers my fury. Because it shows a lack of professionalism in the budget. It shows that we have not listened attentively as a Conservative government to professional advice before bringing that budget to the Houses of Parliament. And it triggers International Monetary Fund, IMF, to tell us in the following week as if we are a third world country who doesn't know how to balance our own book. And that was very shameful. But I'm not on the proposition, you see, because I'm not far left. But I do endorse the honourable gentleman from St. John's and many spoken ones here that you gave excellent speech. I couldn't agree with you that much because I'm not on the far left. But and there's a reason behind that, because I still think there's some remaining residual hopes for the Conservative Party. In the recent Conservative Party conference, there's been a lot of members, senior members including, Michael Gove in particular, saying something that they truly believe in, something that may against the current government, but it is this frankliness, this professionalness, speaking out from their professional, very quickly, I'll finish very quickly, professional ideas that triggers the government a U-turn. And I think this U-turn is a good one, that finally we bring back on track of our own policy. It's open for discussion, it's open for feedback, it's actually professional feedback, and I think it's kind of balanced up from what they do wrong. So I think there's some remaining confidence, remaining hope in this government. But in order to conclude, I would say at the starting point it's very bad, and I think we should be also compassionate towards the government to make policy at a very sort of very difficult time. And I think the continuous hope we have is depreciating. I appreciate that. But for that reason, I think both sides are still balanced at the moment, and I would urge an abstention tonight. Thank you very much.
A point of order, Madam President. Just for the last floor speaker in opposition to the motion, so on this side of the House, it'd be great if we'd have somebody who actually supported this side of the House.
That would be good, wouldn't it?
They're hard to find.
Yeah, no, somebody who is astutely keen to defend His Majesty's government. That has lowered the number of hands in the room. Up in the rafters there. I'm really, really sorry. That's a long way to get a mic.
Isaac Miller-Sklid, Gomble and Keys College. I'll preface this speech by saying that I'm from New Zealand, so forgive the New Zealand twang, which contrary to the beliefs of many of the people I've met this week, is indeed different from an Australian accent. I think my reason for having confidence in this government is that the structure and composition of this government is conducive to a level of dissent that actually gets some honest reflection and compromise on policy. Because I think if you look around the world and at governments like I have back home in New Zealand or in the US, you either have extremes where governments are able to do whatever the top members in cabinet want without any challenge, or they're hamstrung by individuals like Joe Manchin in the Senate. I think that at least with this government, if you are able to have a system where there are members of cabinet and there are members on the backbench who are able to offer dissent and who are able to get a reasonable level of discourse within the party, and there's some honest self-reflection within the top levels of that party, that's actually conducive to good policy. And I think that that's a reason why we should have confidence in this government.
Thank you so much, and that concludes our final round of floor speeches for the night. Moving to our final round of paper speeches, and to close the debate, I'd like to welcome Jonathan Hayward to the floor. Jonathan is a third-year undergraduate in history at Trinity College. He's a former chair of Colk, and he's the current secretary of National Labour Students, and evidently very popular. Won the right to speak through open audition. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
I mean, I get sad sometimes. I do. I get sad sometimes because I think... Don't worry. I get sad sometimes because I think we could have had it so good. We, our generation, could have had it so good. Keir said at the end of his speech that we're on track to fall behind Poland in GDP per capita by the 2030s. Think about that. Poland, a country that was just escaping total dictatorship and economic oppression, was a colony state of the Soviet Union in the 1980s, is overtaking us, a country that used to be one of the greatest in the world. But it didn't have to be this way. And it wasn't on that direction, because in 2010, when Labour left office, we had a higher GDP per capita than the USA, than Germany, than every other country in the G7. We had the highest GDP per capita in the G7 and the lowest debt to GDP ratio. And since then, we now have the lowest GDP per capita in the G7. We have undergone a 12-year period of economic decline unlike in any developed nation in the history of the world. I can't remember the last time the living standards of Britons got worse. Even in the depths of the Great Depression, at least we were electrifying our houses and having vaccines to cure us of life-changing diseases. We don't even have that. Instead, we have a period of national decline of the likes of which we've never seen. Our debt to GDP ratio is now increasing so dramatically that the IMF is concerned. The IMF. And they're right to be worried. The argument that we've heard out of Keir and Bim is a bit absurd. Keir's more absurd than Bim's, truth be told. Because Keir is a man who really, really wants to believe in the Conservative Party, because he really, really wants to be a Conservative MP. But he can't... But he's got a problem. He can't quite figure out how to defend this Conservative Party. So he comes up with this ingenious argument. The budget, the government is fantastic, except for all the things I don't like, and assuming they do all the things that I do like. If you ignore all the tax cuts and pretend that they're a non-issue, don't talk about the £40 billion of corporation tax cuts, and if you imagine that they're going to do all the pro-growth policies that they've repeatedly opposed through the Johnson years and will oppose again, and are never going to get passed, that Labour has pledged itself to, then they'd be great. But they're not doing these things. I think Bim's position is slightly more understandable because his job depends on it. I mean, he's in this situation, deer in the headlights, that he's realised that he can't defend this government, but has to plead for a post in the next Kemi Badenoch government, or whatever it is that in 3 months succeeds this shit show. But we had an inheritance fit for kings. We were well on the road to eliminating child poverty with a mix of child tax credits and Sure Start programs, getting kids into education, having proper social mobility increases that were looking like we were on the way to getting a finally socially mobile country. And now we're dead last among rich countries, purely because, well, every single other country in the G7 was spending more money during the financial crisis, investing in their infrastructure, investing in their education, in better universities, in schemes to help small businesses. We cut. We cut local government, we cut education, we cut healthcare, we stopped building new trains or new power stations, contrary to what Bim said, and we're paying the price of it now in growth. And that's the thing this government has set out to tackle. And on their own terms, even ignoring all the things that I care about inequality, about poverty, about the people starving outside this very building, the homeless, even ignoring all those things that Tories pretend not to care about. On their own terms, growth, they are failing, and this is a budget that will set them up for failure. We're dealing with the consequences of a decade of indefensible foreign policy, economic policy even. And so much of this hideous budget is the same failed approach. But the difference is austerity 2.0 goes even further than austerity 1.0, even more tax cuts. They're cutting taxes where taxes have never been cut before, and they're funding it through borrowing. Not just cuts, they're doing cuts as well, as they've announced gradually in leaks over the last weeks, but they're also using borrowing. And that's even worse, because not only is it going to destroy the incomes of the just about managing, it's going to wipe the slates of the finances of working families. And they're going to do that by hiking inflation. And they pretend that this is some accident. Someone said that this is the Bank of England's fault. No. During the TV debates, Sunak, who Bim supported, pointed out that Liz Truss's own preferred economic advisor admitted that all this would be funded by 7% interest rates by the Bank of England. That is the design, and it is going to wreck the finances of working people. It's going to wreck the finances of working people because we live in an economy now where people have to take out debt. Everyone in this room who has a student loan has masses of debt that is going up exponentially, literally exponentially, because of inflation. Everyone in here who wants to buy a house, that I assume we all want to do, is going to have to pay more and more. They're now at 6%. They're probably going to go higher. Yes.
Would the honourable gentleman accept that inflation is a global and European problem, not a uniquely British one?
Yes, but our approach to tackling inflation has been to increase it at the same time that every other country is taking steps to prevent it. Instead of having a fiscally expansionary budget, we should be balancing the books on the basis of fairer taxes, on the basis of eliminating the non-dom status that would save us 18 billion the Labour government has pledged to, instead of balancing the books with higher interest rates that penalise every single person in this room who takes debt and harm growth. It harms growth in particular because all the things they want to achieve, high growth rates, need businesses to grow and create more jobs. And a business, a small business, a large business, a medium-sized business, cannot produce new jobs unless it's able to take out debt from banks that it now has to pay extortionate interest rates for, because the government is using up all the capital in the country to pay off their rich donors and to pay off corporations with corporation tax cuts. It isn't necessary, and it doesn't produce growth to double down on corporation tax cuts that have been the policy for the last 12 years, haven't worked then, and won't work now. It's not the comms that are bad, as Keir says, it's the policy that is bad. The money raised borrowing would be much better spent going to insulating people from the worst of this coming economic crisis. And it would be more defensible if it was doing that.
The cost of living crisis.
The substantial part of the budget is going to these tax cuts.
That's not true. That's not
Labour's plan for the energy crisis was just as big as the Tories' plan.
So you agree with us?
And would have been raised by a windfall tax on the profits of BP and Shell. But instead of doing that, they're protecting the profits of oil companies who profited from Putin's war, and protecting the profits of corporations who should rightly be paying more to protect people through this crisis and produce higher levels of growth. Corporation tax cuts did not spark growth under Austerity 1.0. They won't spark growth under Austerity 2.0. All they led to was cuts to services that led to 330,000 excess deaths to austerity. And it's going to happen again as Kwasi has committed to cutting benefits even more at the moment when people need them most. And businesses didn't spend those excess savings investing because they had so little confidence in the long-term future of our economy, our antiquated infrastructure, our vastly underfunded education system, that they didn't spend that money investing. They spent it on shareholder bailouts. If it didn't work then, why will it work now? And worse, we failed to sell this borrowing-only approach to the markets. And that's a disaster, because it means that we're now talking about slashing R&D spending, the very thing that drives growth, rather than investing and instead spending that money on corporation tax cuts. The alternative is a Labour government. Labour offers an alternative to cutting our way to growth. Because if the problem is a lack of business investment, then why don't we just invest? Why don't we just invest in schools? Why don't we just invest in transport? Transport done under the auspices of a nationalised rail system, as Keir Starmer has promised, and that will fix the profiteering and greed of the Tory privatised rail system. Why don't we invest in nuclear power and green power?
Yeah.
Contrary to what BIM has said, Labour's going to increase funding in it by 28 billion a year and put those profits in the hands of a publicly owned energy system called Great British Energy. Investments in schools. Investments in schools. Investments in schools on a scale matched only by the last Labour government, paid for by VAT on private schools for the first time. The thing that's holding our country back isn't corporation taxes, which are the lowest in the G7 and always have been. Cost £40 billion to implement, and they're paying for it with our money. The thing that's holding us back is investment, and a Labour government will invest. Instead of going down the same route again, the route that led to massive raises in homelessness that we still feel, spiking suicide rates driven by unjust and illegal behaviour from the DWP and other government departments, ever-increasing NHS waiting lists that have transformed what was once the best healthcare system in the developed world to one of the most backwards, going down that route again, I think that there's an alternative, and that alternative is a Labour alternative. They know they're wrecking the economy. They're wrecking the lives of the people in it, And if there is a God, he will give Labour the chance to make it right and create a government that cares and invests in the future of British people. Vote against this government and the horrendous economic policy that it's pursued for 12 years and wants to pursue for 2 more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnny, for closing the case for side proposition. I move now to our final speaker and the concluding speaker for side proposition, Unati Gia. Unati is a Master of Law student at Lucy Cavendish College and Innak Shivdasani Cambridge Trust Scholar. She's a former convener of the NLS Debating Society and has won the US-India Comparative Constitutional Law Debate. She won the right to speak through open audition. Unati, the floor is yours.
Do I need to test this or something, or are we good to go? Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to speak here today, especially before such a spirited student gathering. And I say spirited as an understatement because it's been wonderful to listen to all of you. And I'm sure all of you would make fascinating and incredible members of Parliament here someday. What I want to begin by saying is to pick off where the last speaker ended, which is to say that Labour's plan is good. It's a great alternative, the fact that we should nationalize the railway, you should nationalize green energy, all sorts of energy companies. Now, I come from a country where mostly everything has been nationalized since before I was born. And let me tell you the dark side of nationalization as I've seen it. India's had energy companies, coal, electricity, renewable energy, nationalized since the 1970s. There's this idea that's floated by side proposition that nationalization somehow breaks the link between rich private interests and government political class interests. I don't quite understand how that works, because placing the government directly in charge of companies, to me, suddenly doesn't break that link quite at all. Instead, what's happened in India is that all the tenders, whether for coal, for electricity, for renewable energy, go to the same company through an open bidding process, making the owner of that company the 4th richest man in the world today. Just a second. But to conclude my point, and I will of course take your question after that, is to say that nationalization in and of itself, without coming up with a proper plan for efficiency in the long term, for preventing red tape, for preventing political lobbying within the process or within those companies, is a half-baked plan at best. And in the short term, it's not going to solve anything, because that bidding process in and of itself takes a long time. Now I will take your question.
Is it not the case that for the past 2 years we've seen the greatest level of sleaze, the greatest level of corruption in our government contracting, and that it's the Labour Prime Minister Rachel Reeves who has come out with a new charter about how we can avoid such corruption?
If I take that question at its best, I don't believe that sleaze and corruption, and this might be my own opinion, is often almost and always limited to just one political party or one political class. If you're talking about sleaze and corruption, especially in your bureaucracy, let me tell you it's probably everywhere. At least that's been my experience, and it's probably going to infiltrate into everything. So merely saying that we're going to change parties or that this government should be removed on the stance that there is general corruption is, to me, an insufficient argument. I'm fully aware that most of you think this motion to be incontrovertible, even though this government has been in power only for 30 days. I asked myself the same question when I entered the auditions. Do I think this is a balanced motion? Do I think it is as difficult and obtuse a motion as, for example, this House regrets the fall of the British Empire, which to me, I think was indefensible. But as I delved into the events of the past month, and in contrast particularly to the events of the past year, I realized there's quite a bit to say here. And so, despite being in this country for less than 2 weeks, I stand here ready to defend His Majesty's government. I don't think any speaker today has disagreed with the fact that this government faces a gargantuan task. We've talked numbers already, 2 million employment vacancies advertised last month, slowest growth rate, high rate of inflation. Oh, I'm already scared of you. I know you're coming, just a second. But highest rate of inflation, So I don't think His Majesty's government is entirely wrong in focusing on growth, particularly growth through supply-side reforms. But despite the tough times and the enormity of the task before them, the reason I would place confidence in them is their decisiveness and receptiveness, and that is where I find hope. Before I move on to my main argument, let's go. I think that's a fair argument to make, and I think that it's a fair argument to make, and this goes to the core of the argument that I'm going to make today, that it's rare for me to have seen a prime minister that after seeing the public opinion on a policy measure actually thought to withdraw it. And I'm going to build on this argument later, and I'm going to tell you why it's an important democratic value to have the humility to withdraw measures that are not popular with your public mandate. I'm going to tell you why it's absent in countries like India, Brazil, and China, which have then proceeded to become, I don't want to get screwed for this later, but authoritarian regimes, and why the UK is thankfully, because of Liz Truss, possibly far away from that. The first point I want to get down to is talking about the system of representation that we have and why it's inherently exclusionary. Our democracies, whether they're presidential or parliamentary, function on the basis of political representation. And the premise of this idea is that you're trusting someone to speak for you. But the premise of that very idea is that both you and your representative will be heard. What we saw during the pandemic, especially in the United Kingdom, is that this fundamental principle of political representation was consigned to the waste paper basket. When political representatives like Boris Johnson decide that they can proceed to party in contravention and violation of COVID-19 laws, when they condone sexual harassment, when they appoint unsuitable candidates, that's all essentially telling the general public that we don't care about your opinion. Now, once again, this isn't unique to the United Kingdom. It's there in China, it's there in Brazil, it's there in India, and of course, Donald Trump is the best example of it. But this complete and utter disregard for public opinion is one of the greatest dangers that most democracies face today. One second. And this is where the promises of democratic participation that we have run absolutely no. Because these representatives don't feel any obligation to explain their actions, they don't feel any obligation to maintain the dignity of their offices, and they certainly don't feel any obligation to review policies merely because opinion polls tell them that that policy is unpopular. I would argue that this is precisely what the previous government did. But I would also argue that this is where His Majesty's government is different from their predecessor and deserves your confidence for two key reasons. First, because I think this is a responsive government that is attempting to combat crises instead of failing to act. The same person, just a second, that asked me a question, I believe previously pointed out that the COVID-19 death toll in the UK was at one point the highest in the developed world because Boris Johnson failed to act. So the fact that this government is so quick to come up with an energy plan is something that deserves your confidence. Let me remind you that the energy prices started rising last year. Wholesale gas prices went up by 250% last year, but the government didn't do enough then. Let me tell you that as of yesterday, the European Commission is still debating on what to do, whereas the UK is already ahead in taking action. This is something that, I will take it, just a second. This is something that deserves your confidence. This is something that deserves some kudos. And before I get to the worst part of this debate,
the reason the energy crisis here is worse than in Europe, despite their greater reliance on Russia, is because we failed to build gas storage facilities, we failed to build green power, and Labour would build them instead.
I agree with that. But my simple response to that, and you can of course correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline, is that this government isn't responsible for that. And I don't believe you can hold this government and this Prime Minister liable for the faults of the previous. But the second argument that I'd like to make, I'm not going to defend the 45p tax cuts. I believe that Keir already tried. I'm not going to call Liz Truss a humble pragmatist. I don't believe those are my words. But what I will say is this, and what I do want to emphasize on is this, that the fact that she withdrew a policy that didn't do well with the public and didn't do well with the market is something that needs to be considered. I want to... Let me complete my argument. I want to urge that there is a value to politicians today saying that we get it and we have listened, despite extenuating humiliation. Okay, it's protected now, I'm sorry. I want to tie this in to my earlier point on public opinion in the representation process, because this is what your representatives are supposed to do. If they float a policy that the public is unhappy with and the public voices their opinion in the democratic fashion that they're supposed to, they have to withdraw it, and that's precisely what's been done here. This is then clearly a government, it's protected, I'm sorry. This is then clearly a government that values public opinion. And from her speech yesterday, I can't see anything that isn't in line with public mandate. She wants to make NHS appointments faster. She wants to provide better broadband and mobile signal. She wants to push infrastructure projects, which according to me all stem from some sort of compassion, maybe, but at least some sort of understanding of the working class. What is the absolute best case on-side proposition, which is that this government attempted to impose an unfair tax cut that benefits the wealthy. I would say that it is better to live in a democracy where politicians willingly withdraw or review policy that is deemed unfair by the public, as opposed to living in a democracy where you have to wait for the regime to change for such policies to change. I would argue that these democracies are far better. They're far more participative. They're far less authoritarian than the previous kind of regimes. I would like to say that we'd all like to live in a world where the wealthy are not catered to. But I think we can settle for a world where the politicians and the representatives are held liable for when they do cater to the wealthy and when they're forced to withdraw policies that cater to the wealthy. In summation, what I'm going to say is that if this is a government that was decisive and responsive during turmoil, and if this is a government that has tried to acknowledge and accommodate public opinion, then this is a government that you should possibly have confidence in. Thank you so much.
This has been brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been a fascinating debate. I've loved the interventions. You've all really sort of brought a lot of different views to the side. Can we just thank our paper speakers one more time for coming? If this hasn't convinced you to join the union, nothing will. So please head over to cust.org/join. Membership discount to the 14th of October. But, pretty convincing, tomorrow we've got 2 more events. We've got a Challenging the Establishment panel, and we've got the Vamps. On to a bit, I don't know. Stay after this debate. It's not over now. The absolute high point of my time at the union has not been this chamber, actually. It's been the bar through there. So join us all for a drink. Take up the motion. I'd really like to talk to you and meet as many as possible. In this house, we vote with our feet if you are downstairs. So see, there's an aye door and a no door, and the middle door is abstention. We've got some wonderful homes there who are going to collect your votes. Upstairs, you might think you have an aye and a no door. You don't. Please don't use them or you'll trample Sam. Instead, you'll be given a card on your way out, and you can put that in an aye basket or a no basket. So without further ado, please go and vote and join us in the bar. Thank you.